Thank you, Sue, and NewmR for the invitation to participate in this webinar. And I want to share with you some postcards from the Edge in the form of a series of reflections about how the region from which I speak can contribute to the global discussion for reinventing our discipline and our industry. I will begin my story by recalling that a few years ago, Lenny Murphy had his first Latin American experience from attending a conference organized by AIM, the industry association in Chile. At the time, Lenny launched this provocation where he adventured to think that Latin America could be the playground for the next revolution in the industry. Flashback to the early 90s when ETHNO came for its Latin American Research Conference in Mexico City. It was so much a breakthrough that it was possible to get the president of the country to make the opening of the conference. Here's the photograph in the screen. You see here President Salinas with some of the organizers. Well, so what happened between those two experiences, the ETHNO conference in 1993 and Lenny's epiphany 2 decades later? I could say it in one word: globalization. Globalization has changed everything in the planet in a very fast way. In Latin America, it produced an acceleration effect, creating transcendent repercussions in societies that had lived in a very traditional way and that from one day to the next did leapfrog in many terms. But where were we taking when we talk about Latin America? Well, it is a region of 20 national states with a population close to 650 million people, growing at such a rapid pace that in the next 20 years, it could surpass the total population of Europe, and has a market with a value of almost $4 billion US, which is a figure similar to what China now has, but with a higher per capita weight. If we have to choose a short group of words to characterize Latin Americans, we could say that it's a group young, urban, and migrant. In the case of MR industry in Latin America, these almost 3 decades of globalization have had a colossal impact in many aspects. Allow me to mention just 3 that I consider relevant for the purpose of this talk. The first one we can talk is about what my colleagues in Argentina know as aggiornamento. This is an idiom of the Italian language that implies not only updating, but also modernizing, taking away the antiquated, the old, and embracing newness. On the other hand, this process gave way to a sense of community. It became the origin of practically all the professional associations that we have had today and marked the beginning of the closest collaboration between professionals in different countries. Thirdly, this influx brought a paradigm shift in many of the analysis of markets and businesses. With a long tradition of critical thinking, applied Latin American research did very well to receive the pragmatic, descriptive, and functional wins of market research and related disciplines. I say we are adopting now a culture of evidence. That is, the imperative to base the analysis not only on good reasoning, but also on solid data obtained under systematic procedures. I think it is now our turn to give back something, and that's the main subject of these presentations. This presentation, ways in how Latin America can contribute to the global discussion about the direction of our discipline and industry will take and should take. Because of that, and I will share with you 4 examples that might become learnings of adaptable value in other parts of the world. First, postcard. For ages, Latin American societies has been unequal. There has been a dominant minority, generally with a certain European roots, and a large mass of poor indigenous population. Things changed in the 20th century with the emergence of the new thriving middle classes. But today, the base of the pyramid of BOP is far from being a traditional backward rural segment anymore. They do live in urban centers, striving to create living conditions for their homes, and with a firm aspiration of social ascent. For years, many business sectors had ignored the BOP, but currently, under pressure, they turn to see them, realizing the need to create new ingenious solutions for market them. Therefore, numerous disruptive examples have emerged. Non-banking credit services, distribution tag channels that take advantage of the traditional informality in the slums, alternative SKUs that adapt to space constraints in households, accommodating a larger than standard family. An interesting case is that of the company Global Food of Peru, now extended to 6 countries in other countries in the region, that has developed cereals from Andean raw materials, innovating with unusual types of packaging and distribution chains. Inevitably, all this has led to its brands to have a relationship with their consumers, which is very different to those seen before in the country. I ask you now, could this experience be illustrative for understanding BOP populations now surging in many countries because of effects such as forced and voluntary migrations? Second postcard. There is much talk in our discipline about the need to bring two seemingly antipodal worlds close together. How to unite the methodological rigor of science with the creativity and flexibility of art? This question is not new because it has been present for centuries in virtually any field of study. There is a wonderful book by Andrea Wolf that tells the story of Alexander von Humboldt. Humboldt, who was a famous polymath of the natural sciences, also known as the Shakespeare of the sciences, caused a Copernican revolution by changing the conception of sciences, such as biology or geography, ultimately proposing the idea of a holistic perception of the universe. Many of his insights to unite science plus art in the explanation of nature emerged nothing strange from the extensive travels that Humboldt made in Latin America, being the first scientist who really described the variety and natural richness of the region. What Humboldt did was to provoke a dissonance by breaking the harmonic yet unlimited explanation available at his time. In other words, he did what is now being asked constantly: disrupt the status quo and create other, new, fresher thoughts, approaches, paradigms. Coming back to our turf, how to bring art and science together in market research. Let me show you now a recent example I have at hand. It is a well-crafted work in demographic semiotics done by a group of Mexican researchers led by Heriberto Lopez. For years, Heriberto and his team have been mining large bodies of demographic and social data, compile them, distill them, and extracting conceptual constants. Later on, they look for ways to embody the results, to humanize it, to give them flesh and bone, by developing a carefully selected sample of individuals and homes that are visited by trained photographers. The result is a visual display of demographic knowledge, which is as useful for the specialist in statistics and demography as it is for the television producer who wants to look at the ways of the life of the people. It is very revealing for the youngsters who are entering the industry, as for the managers of multinational companies that land here and seek to understand a society as complex and visually expressive as the Mexican one. Third postcard. No one neglects anymore the power of emotions in decision-making. In fact, a seismic change in human sciences is acceptance that emotion and reason have equal relevance in almost everyday circumstances. A good friend of mine, Elina Halonen, made me reflect the fact that much of the theoretical building that we now call behavioral economics has been created from studying the processes of choice and decision in Anglo-Saxon individuals, specifically university students who for decades have been participating enthusiastically in the experiments conducted by their teachers. It is then relevant to ask how these processes happen in cultures such as Latin America, in which there is a greater context of declarative and behavior emotionality. or what happens when what is said is not necessarily a lie, but simply words do not serve to fully express the emotion that something produces. One good example is a fun experience jointly developed by Unilever Mexico and the insights company De La Riva Group. Faced with the very difficult task of making an ethnocultural map of Mexican food, the research team soon realized that any traditional protocol would fall short given the enormous culinary wealth of the country, but also because the great emotional and sensitive load that any Mexican food has. Instead, what they created is something that we could call mobile insights factory. By carrying a food truck all over the country to collect recipes from the diners themselves. The food truck did not offer a specific type of food, but rather it sought to reflect, but above all, to collect the local traces in the rich mosaic of the Mexican domestic gastronomy. You can see in detail the case through the ETHNO library because it was presented at the 2016 Annual Congress. For now, let me emphasize that along the way, the authors, Leti Chárraga and Adelina Vaca, learned and so proposed to bring back joy to research by combining 5 components that form the word that refers to the Greek terms Sophia, or wisdom. And it's made by these words: spontaneous, organic, fun, immersive, and aggregated. For Postcard. Much of the narrative about new market research is about the imperative to do things differently. But what about doing these different things in a very different place? A place that you can find yourself among human groups that are marketing fresh, that had not been bombarded throughout their lives by thousands and thousands of commercial and advertising efforts. Well, that place exists now. It is called Cuba, and it's a virgin territory that some market researchers are already exploring. For instance, a good friend of mine, the Mexican Fernando Alvarez, who recently held the experience of doing the first study of brand valuation in the Cuban market. Cuba is an extraordinary place in many ways. It has a level of income comparable to an underdeveloped country in other continents, yet at the same time has a literacy rate that surpasses that of Brazil, Mexico, even Spain. It has an outdated technological infrastructure, yet a remarkably high possession and adoption rate of smartphones. It is a market in which brand preference is rare, but brand availability is the key. People are accustomed to buy what there is, queuing to enter the supermarket and finding only some varieties on the shelves. The interesting thing here is that the big international brands already arriving are generating new and fresh relationships with the Cuban consumer. With no media advertising as we know it, how do people get knowledge about brands and offers? Well, from the conversation, which is the element of social cohesion in this country's population, accustomed for long to being in a very close contact with each other within an outdated and restricted media ecosystem. In short, Cuba is becoming a fantastic playground to test and disprove hypotheses about things as social influence on decision, relationship with brands, price and satisfaction trade-offs, the relative acceptance of international brands with great fame and global resonance, but practically empty of prestige in this market. Let me finish with 2 last thoughts. The first one is about the disturbing new normality we are living in, aptly described with this acronym from military jargon. We live, yes, and will continue to live for years, perhaps decades, in an era characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, a combination that is derailing many business strategies. But I can tell you that those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have not been strangers to many of the societies of the 20 national states that make up Latin America. Maybe here it has been the opposite. It wouldn't be easy to find people who have always lived in certainty, simplicity, calm, and clarity. Finally, there is a clamor. We need to shift attention from transactions, as it was done for decades in classic marketing and classic market research, and instead concentrate in relationships. Maybe you have noticed that I have repeatedly used that word, relationships, throughout this talk. It is not simply the effect of my poor command of English, for which I certainly apologize, but I did on purpose, to stress that human relationships are a key word to fully understand Latin American stamp in many areas of life in general. Family interaction, business, the game of politics, and yes, of course, consumption preferences and decision. This webinar has been called Beyond Market Research. I hope I have shaken you so to think that going beyond is also a matter of adventuring into other geographies, such as that of Latin America. Do it. You'll have a lot of fun and some other benefits in the way. Thank you so much for your attention, and greetings from the edge.